Hey, how are you doing? Good morning. I'm just an idiot who loves to read books. If you're an idiot who loves to read books like me, consider subscribing, okay? We're both friends, we're both just readers. Today we'll be talking about The Color of Magic and why this particular book is one of the best fantasy books ever written. And let's talk about, first of all, I would like to thank Jack Shannon, a long-time viewer of this channel who has been literally for so long encouraging me to read Terry Pratchett, and I finally picked him up, and I have never laughed so hard reading a book in my entire life. So, thank you, Jack Shannon, for making my summer even much better. But there is something I would like to emphasize. I absolutely abhor fantasy authors that do not embrace the fantasy genre. Number one. Number two, they are not really using fantasy, and at least the fantastical elements, in order to tell a story, okay? So I believe that fantasy is actually one of the best genres that exists. And I believe that an author who writes fantasy should be able to use the fantastical elements of the story in order to actually tell a human, thematically rich story, okay? In other words, I believe that fantasy can be literary. And in this particular story, The Color of Magic, which I'm not even sure if I should have started there, but whatever. This particular story is the definition of why fantasy is important, of why basically fantasy is awesome. Every advantage The Color of Magic has over a lot of other fantasy books is primarily because Terry Pratchett just embraces the fantasy genre. He goes completely out of his mind. There is something in the Discworld, and in this particular story, The Color of Magic, called narrativium, something like that. Basically, you imagine dragons, and you imagine dragons really hard, and you believe in them. Imagine, for instance, in your closet right now, as you and me are talking, imagine that there is literally a dragon in your closet, and that dragon is your pet, and he loves you, and he will do anything for you. And you believe that deeply. Well, open your closet, okay? Depending on the rules of this universe, okay, there is a dragon in your closet because you have believed in that heart. Like, there are points in this story where heroes like Two Flower literally summons a dragon to rescue his ass, okay, to get out of trouble. And I just love this. I think this is just beautiful. And not only that, but it's used to tell a story with Rincewind, which really surprised me because he runs away from all of his problems. Yeah, he's literally forced by a sentient sword, which is just amazing, okay? And so I wanted to get this started here, and I wanted to establish this particular narrative because I love Terry Pratchett, and I will love him for the rest of my life because he is another author who embraces the fantasy genre completely. And this is made even more important. By the way, this is the review. Yeah, this is how my reviews go. It's crazy, it's wild, it goes in all directions. Much like The Color of Magic. Well, basically, there are so many fantasy authors, modern fantasy authors, and back in the day, there were a lot of fantasy authors who really just avoided, framing themselves as fantasy authors. They basically didn't want to be associated with fantasy because it was not literary, right? And what you have is someone like Terry Goodkind, who famously said that, he doesn't just write fantasy and that his readers are not fantasy or genre fiction readers, they are general fiction readers, right? He wanted to be a literary author so bad. If you want literary, go fucking write literary. Yes, I think the entirety of the Discworld. Okay, so the lighting has been shut off. Look who it is. It's the Mad Queen. She turned off the lighting, okay? I turned it back on. Now we're functional. Number two, literally the world of this particular story, like, I could really talk about the crazy, fantastical things. You can imagine anything and bring it to life. There are mountain trolls, there are sea trolls. There's quite a a variety of trolls, okay? Which I haven't seen a lot in other books. There are crazy people who are at the edge of the world called Corellians, and they kind of don't like water, and they want to see the gender of the great turtle, and and they're trying to go to space. At some point, literally the protagonist summons a freaking jet, a real world jet. Yeah, I love this story. It's really crazy. Anyhow, moving on. Let's now get into the review, okay? Because I honestly could not wait talking about that. It was such a refreshing thing because I read, Rage of Dragons and then Jade City, and both of these stories are kind of a minimalist fantasy compared to the Discworld. They are not necessarily minimalist fantasy with Rage of Dragons and Jade City, but compared to Discworld, everything is a minimalist fantasy. Okay, so I just wanted to really get that in there, okay? By far, the best part of this story has to be Terry Pratchett as a writer, as an author, and the way he uses the English language and how his descriptions and the way he writes and the way he presents the world is so beautiful. I feel like Rincewind and Terry Pratchett are such a beautiful mix because Rincewind is kind of cynical, okay? Actually, he's very cynical, and Terry Pratchett, I feel like these two people can vibe very well because, you know, they are both capable of beautiful social commentary. I feel like Rincewind is basically an extension of Terry Pratchett because they are both just so perfect for each other. I have never read a book where the protagonist and the author seemed to be in such a sync, okay? If you read any book, you will find that the author cannot possibly in any way really be, like a lot of the time, this particular character, because this is epic, heroic, and so on and so forth. But I feel like in another life, in another universe, Terry Pratchett might as well be Rincewind because both of them are just they just vibe so well, and it just makes the story so much better. Another thing I loved about Rince is actually how this review is completely chaos. There is no structure whatsoever. I love the arc that he has, the little arc that he has. And again, I've talked about many times character arcs being told thanks to the fantasy. And so, you know, we have Rincewind, who his entire life, his life philosophy in general is just run away from all of your problems, right? And this story, he is forced at some point to act, okay? He's forced to go back and to save his friends. This is when, well, no need to talk about where that happens or when that happens, but you get it, right? He has a character arc that I think is beautiful, and I really love that. I love that the fantastical elements of the story I used to tell the character arc, at least the little character development that Rincewind happens to have in this particular story. Another thing is how hilarious this particular story is. It's so insanely hilarious. I honestly cannot believe Terry Pratchett is not a comedian. Yeah, Terry Pratchett is just super hilarious. And he's so witty. He's so witty. So yeah, I cannot stop raving about this book. I don't know why. Is there a problem? There has to be a problem. Oh yeah, let's talk about one particular issue that you might have. Not me, that you might have. This story, as I said, goes deep. It doesn't give a damn. Terry Pratchett doesn't give a damn. He will embrace the fantasy completely. Whatever the people tell each other might as well be reality. Literally, the entire story is being played by gods. It's a board game. If you're looking for something like the Way of Kings or the Rage of Dragons or Jade City, these or like Prince of Thorns or Lies of Locke Lamora with Gentleman Bastards, if you're looking for these stories that are really epic, really sorry to spoil the fun. You're not going to be enjoying this story. But if you want to have fun reading a fantasy book once in a while, this is the book for you. It was the book for me from the get-go because I love to read a fun fantasy story all the time, every day, all day, whatever. Yeah, so if you are someone who likes his art serious or his stories serious, you might not enjoy this particular story. Everything else I have absolutely loved. Terry Pratchett can write a character. This is important for me because I am a character nerd and I have heard so much hype around the character of Death. Okay, Death has been so hyped up that if you talk about fantasy, if you read fantasy, if you have been reading fantasy for any number of years, if you have been to the fantasy subreddit or anywhere where fantasy nerds gather, Death is often always in the conversation for some of the best written characters in the fantasy genre. I have no idea who he is. I have never even read a single paragraph with this particular character. He doesn't show up in this particular story. Since he is so hyped up, and he is literally one of the main things that people talk about when they talk about Discworld. I expected he would literally be in the first book, but actually turns out he's one of many characters. This story, well, the Discworld is just a world. It's like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where there are so many different characters. It's a continuous world with established continuity from what I've researched. So I am interested in death. And what I will be doing next is actually picking up the list of books that are focused on death. He is so famous that he has his own section, and he is so well respected. And Terry Pratchett, I can confirm, 100% can write character. Okay, he knows how to write a character. Therefore, I'll be picking up death. I'll be checking all of his books, and I will see if the hype is true or if the hype is false. Okay, if he's just hyped because this particular character is famous, or he is actually the real deal, and it's just, you know, it happens to be great art that is greatly appreciated. Okay, and so I suppose I will find that out. I hope that you enjoyed this. Have a nice day.